So real quickly, I want to talk about Ukraine. More recently, the Ukrainians went into Russian waters in a aggressive fashion. The Russians responded. I think they may have rammed one of the Ukrainian vessels, something like that. It kind of looks staged, and now there is martial law in the country. And supposedly, I mean, you can never really trust on face value any statistics, any polls. You got to look, you know, how were the polls taken? You know, was it demographically or scientifically significant, the amount of people who were polled in different regions, and were those regions adequately represented for how many people they have? So it's very biased. And the thing about Ukraine, there's factions in the West that actually decided to work with the Germans. And a lot of Ukrainians at first wanted to work with the Germans against the Soviet government. They did not want a government over them. They were, you know, peasants, farmers. They did not want to be given any of their food to Moscow. So they thought maybe the German takeover would be a good thing, but then the Germans were assassinating them, had mass graves, and so it's a complicated story. But regardless of that, I'm going to go into the history of Ukraine and Russia. So Ukraine actually, Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, actually used to be the capital of ancient Russia. Now, the name of Russia actually comes from Rus, and they were actually Scandinavians, Vikings, that, as the story goes, were invited to rule, after the Khans had departed or lost control. They were unable to tax that region. That is a little bit obscure. I mean, I've read about it, but I haven't spoken about it enough to I don't want to say anything that is wrong, but that was my understanding from reading, and it's basically the truth. But as for Kiev, the capital, as for Ukraine, as for Crimea, the history of Crimea, it was originally populated, as far as we know, by Greeks. Thousands of years ago, after the Phoenicians, the Athenians, they were all about shipping, about commerce within the Mediterranean Black Sea, and they were able to expand. I mean, they were the quote-unquote original inhabitants of Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, the capital of Turkey. Those were Greek-speaking peoples at the time. Constantine declared that part of Europe the Second Roman Empire. Okay, so after the Greeks came the Turks. Okay, so the Turks were conquered by Catherine the Great. She went in there, she wanted to expand her empire, and some of them got kicked out, and Russians got moved in. But basically, it was still pretty much the same under different rule. In around like 1945, the Soviets moved a lot of those quasi-Turkish people to the Tartars, to the stands like Uzbekistan, other kind of similar, whatever, Persian, Turkic areas, for whatever reason. Sad, but that is what happened. So most of the people that live there today speak Russian, and they identify with Russia. Now, Ukraine, go back 5-6 years ago, they wanted to be both friends with the EU and also friends with Russia. And it was Western European and American people that did not want that to happen. They only wanted Ukraine to be a member of NATO. And you go back to NATO, NATO was ostensibly formed to stop the spread of communism emanating out of Russia. When Russia, for whatever reason, he could have been paid off, the head of Russia at the time, Gorbachev, who now has a mansion in California, could have been paid off to sign over the Soviet Union. You know, who knows? It is a possibility, and there are Russians who do believe that is what happened. But anyways, when the Soviet Union broke up, we gave them our verbal agreement that also NATO would be disbanded, but it wasn't. The NATO guys, they want to keep their jobs. I went over this before. They don't want to just say, yeah, we're no longer needed, you know, just fire us. It's cool. We had great jobs. We had all these connections. All of our friends in the defense industry were making all this money, but we're not needed. So let's do the right thing. Put me on some unemployment, and you know, maybe I'll go after being part of NATO. Maybe I'll open a restaurant or something. Like, that's just not what's taking place. That's not what's going on. The jobs stayed. And not only that, NATO kept expanding onto Russia's borders, threatening Russia, while saying that Russia's the one acting aggressive. Guess how many foreign bases Russia has? 2. Guess how many we have? 800 to 5,000. A wee bit of difference, you know. 800 permanent bases that we admit to. China, 1. But it's China and Russia, combined 3, that are acting aggressive, while we have bases all around them. We have, freedom of navigation boats in the South China Sea ready to have a naval blockade anytime we want. And we're complaining about them making islands to defend themselves so they can still bring in resources to their only port, Djibouti, which happens to be close to Yemen, which we are now practicing genocide in Yemen. But back to Ukraine. So the story of Ukraine, the story of Crimea. Catherine the Great came in. It was a part of Russia. Then a drunk Khrushchev, who happens to be Ukrainian or whatever, he may or may not have been drunk. One night he decides to deed that part of Russia to Ukraine. So, whatever. Ukraine had it for like 50 years. And NATO funded those Nazi collaborators in a part of Western Ukraine to go to the capital and have a revolution. And who knows what international actors had their backs that were acting sniper cover fire, whatever it took to get rid of that government. Now there's a government in there with about 10% approval rating that just instituted martial law. You're telling me that's freedom now? That they're free under martial law? That's free, right? How Orwellian are we going to get? How many warning signs do we need before we understand that something is really wrong and we can no longer depend on voting to fix it? Voting alone has never fixed anything. The Great Deal, Roosevelt's Roosevelt's New Deal did not come from voting. It came from activism. It came from people coming together with common ground and talking to their elected representatives and saying, this is not taking place any longer. We are starving. So, anyways, Ukraine martial law today. Russia did not invade the Crimea. They did not come out with guns blazing. Those people want Russia there. That's why there is not a separatist movement as there is right now in Western Ukraine. If anyone's attacking Crimea, it's the Ukrainians, not the Russians. I'm trying to think if there's anything I could add to that. And you actually have pictures of John McCain with the basically Nazis, the Ukrainian Nazis. I mean, so that's where our, we're freedom and democracy. We hire Nazis, or, people that have statues of Nazi collaborators in their city to, get a government to give them freedom. Our foreign policy makes no effing sense, and that is because we're not being told the truth. And I don't know how many wake-up calls we're going to need, and before we're woken up, it's time to wake up. It's time to demand change. Voting isn't happening for many, many reasons. There are pressures greater than our votes that are stopping people from pursuing any sort of progressive anti-war agenda. The power is in our hands if we believe it is and act on it. But all it takes for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing. Right now, we are as guilty as were the people that lived in times of slavery and did nothing, because right now our military, our government is enslaving and stealing from various parts of the world. You can read John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman. We are a banking, we are the army country of the banksters and oil people. And Ukraine, it is unfortunate, that is the bread basket of Eastern Europe that we attempted to steal from its longtime cultural cousin. Anyways, they're both Slavs, whether the Westerns want to admit it or not. They're Slavic people. Have a good day.